Welcome to the Crawcast. I'm your host, George Krawczak, and this is what happened in Week 14 of the NFL season. The first game was the Detroit Lions versus the Green Bay Packers, and the Lions won 34-31. The Lions' leading passer was Jared Goff, who threw for 283 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher is David Montgomery, who rushed for 51 yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver is Jameson Williams, who had 80 receiving yards. And for the Packers, their leading passer is Jordan Love, who threw for 206 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Josh Jacobs, who had 66 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Christian Watson, who had 114 receiving yards. So this game was a pretty back and forth game. It felt like the Lions really dominated in the first half, and the Packers dominated in the second half. There's a few key points I see a lot of people talking about that I want to address. First off, right at the end of the game, when the Lions were running the ball to get the first down and kick the game-winning field goal, Jared Goff tripped and his knee was down. The reason why he was not down in the game is because in the NFL, you either have to be touched or voluntarily give yourself up. For example, like voluntarily giving yourself up counts as like a slide or a kneel down or something like that, and it's kind of more of an intent tackle kind of thing you have to look at the intent of the player. And obviously, I think you would see Jared Goff did not want to kneel the ball there. And since he was not touched, they were free to go and get the first down. Another thing is, so in this game, it really felt like the Packers' offensive line collapsed. I saw that Aaron Glenn, the Lions defense coordinator, really seemed to be using the Brian Flores strategy, which is have like 6 people up in the line. Sometimes you send 6, sometimes you send 4, sometimes you send 5, but you don't know which 4 of the people are coming. It could be 2 to the right, could be 2 to the left, could be 3 to the right. Like, you don't know. And so that seems like it absolutely worked against the Packers, and they struggled to defend it. And you kind of need the simulated pressure kind of like that, where the Lions' defensive line is pretty injured. So instead of getting like real pressure, because the guys probably aren't good enough, you have the simulated pressure, which really, like I said, faked out the Packers' offensive line, and they struggled a lot. And then the next is to address is the penalties. I see a lot of people talking about the penalties, and I agree. I think it was a problem because it felt like really one-sided against the Packers, all the penalties were. But overall, I think you should kind of just play better in the sense where the penalties won't matter. But this is why I think in the NFL is you do have the guys in New York, the professionals and the heads of the NFL saying, okay, calling in saying this is a catch, this isn't a catch. You have stuff like that, or saying, oh, look, this is a touchdown, this isn't a touchdown. Why can't they do that with penalties? I get 1 o'clock games because there's like 9 being played at once. I kind of get 4:25 games because there's a couple played at that, or a couple of games played at that time. But I feel like Thursday night, Sunday night, and Monday night, there should be no either missed calls or bad calls because the people in New York should just phone down and say, hey, either you missed this one, this should be a penalty, or you got this one wrong, this was called a penalty and it shouldn't be. So there's a couple of those where the one that I didn't like where Dan Skipper flopped. It was an unnecessary roughness play by Quay Walker, plain and simple. He did hit him after the play he shouldn't have, and that should have been a penalty. I just didn't like Dan Skipper flopping because I'll also mention because there was a couple other ones where Josh Allen flopped really bad, and then I can't remember there was another one in a game where it was a really bad flop. I think those should either be penalties or fines because I just don't think that's good for the NFL in the sense that, like, even Dan Skipper, he winked afterwards. It should have been a penalty, let me be clear about this. I just don't like kind of, not necessarily over-exaggerating, but trying to draw the penalty. The ref should have just seen it in the first place. And it's kind of like reminds me a little bit of Brandon Ayuk, where I'd say, like, look what happened to him. Is he didn't act well during training camp. He sat out, and then all of a sudden the 49ers gave him a bad contract and he hasn't had a good year and got injured. If he did not sit out for training camp, he would not have gotten a huge contract. And same with this. If Dan Skipper didn't flop, maybe there wouldn't have been a penalty. I don't know if the refs would have called it or not. But I just don't like, in principle, rewarding bad behavior. And then there's another thing another penalty that, again, is a little bit iffy. There's a pick play in the sense where it wasn't even really a pick play. where the Packers threw a touchdown to Josh Jacobs. What happened there is the play was clearly designed to go to the left to Jayden Reed, but Jayden Reed kind of got tripped up and fell over. And so then, after the play completely breaks down, Jordan Love works back to his right and throws a touchdown to Josh Jacobs. The reason was and they called a penalty on Christian Watson. Because what happened is Christian Watson was running a slant over the middle, and since Kirby Joseph was trying to play man coverage on Josh Jacobs, they kind of just ran into each other with more Kirby Joseph running into Christian Watson. And he got called for pass interference because they're suggesting that, Christian Watson's blocking Kirby Joseph. And I just don't. And again, that's one of those where it feels like more of a little bit of an intent penalty, where it's if they run into each other, not a penalty. But if Christian Watson purposely blocks him, it is a penalty. And to me, it just seemed like a total accident. Like the play wasn't even designed to do that. He was just running his route, and Kirby Joseph just ran right into him. So I didn't like that call. And there was also a few other ones where I feel like it was a little ticky-tacky in the sense that, Detroit was running the exact same pick plays where they're, especially the one on the final drive, there was a screen to Jahmyr Gibbs, and I believe it was either Laporta or Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think it was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He didn't even attempt to run a route. He literally just blocked Isaiah McDuffie, and that was that. And so, again, I didn't like those calls, and I felt like the refs should have been better. And again, like I said, the guys from New York, since this was the only game being played and the only game everyone was watching, it should have been better of that. And then there was one play that I think Kirby Joseph will get fined, where Tucker Kraft caught a ball and it was near the sidelines. And then Kirby Joseph just torpedoed. His head was down and just went right for Tucker Kraft's knees. Like, he didn't even attempt to make a tackle. He didn't attempt to push him out of bounds or even use any form at all. He was just torpedoing right towards Tucker Kraft's knees. So I think Kirby Joseph will get fined for this. And I do think the NFL needs to kind of take this out of the game in the sense of the lunging of the head first. That's the problem. Because we are seeing Kirby Joseph take out Tyler Higbee and TJ Hawkinson, and I think maybe Mason Rudolph. There was a couple other guys that happened to, where Azeez Al-Shaair, he led with his head, hit hit Trevor Lawrence in the head, got suspended, and you say, ooh, that was a very dirty play, should not have happened. This kind of feels like the same thing, where it was a very dirty play by Kirby Joseph, and he just so happened to miss. Does him missing, negate what happened effectively? And so I think the NFL should either take that out of the game, but Kirby Joseph will definitely receive a big fine for that, just because that's unacceptable, where he's not even trying to make the tackle. He's literally just trying to injure Tucker Kraft. And then the final drive of the game, where Dan Campbell went for a really gutsy fourth down call, where what happened is they had the ball on about the Packers, or on their own 40-yard line, I believe. They could kick a field goal, or they could go for it. And they decided to go for it, fourth down and 1. They run the ball and they get it. I think that was a really bad move by Dan Campbell. Yes, it ended up working, because here's the issue. The Packers had 0 timeouts left, and after you kick the field goal, you're probably going to get about 40 seconds, maybe 35 seconds for the Packers. So and the Lions almost botched it with Jared Goff tripping. So if Jared Goff did trip and fall over, the Lions will have lost this game. And this is the reason why I don't like it, the call, is because if you kick the field goal there, then you're up by 3. The Packers basically have about 38 seconds, 0 timeouts to get about 40 yards to get into field goal range, or to do 70 yards to get a touchdown. Whereas if you go for it and you don't get it, then the Packers just need about 30 yards to get a field goal and they win, and just to get a field goal and a win. So if your options are basically, it's almost impossible to tie it, but they have a shot at it, and they really can't win, so it's either go to overtime if they kick it there, or if they don't get it, then the Packers basically will automatically win. I just thought that was just too risky of a scenario for the Detroit Lions, and I wouldn't have gone for it. Yes, it worked out, but I just thought that was a bad move. Overall, it's a really good game. Lions, you gotta be happy you're fighting for that 1 seed. You're probably gonna get it. And the Packers, it does kind of change the injury strategy a little bit in the sense that it feels like they kind of have nothing to play for now. You're not going to get the 1 seed. You're not going to get the division. All you need to do is win 1 game the rest of the year to make the playoffs. And looking at their schedule, they have the Seahawks, who that'll be a tough game. They have the Saints without Derek Carr, so that'll be really difficult. They have the Vikings, which may or may not be difficult because they might bench their players depending on where they are in the playoffs. And they have the Bears, who they should beat. So overall, I think the Packers can get one win out of those 4 games, and so it's kind of like, okay, do you bring guys back? Do you not? It's going to be interesting how they play it. The next game is the Minnesota Vikings versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Vikings won 42-21. The Vikings' leading passer was Sam Darnold, who threw for 347 yards and 5 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Aaron Jones, who had 73 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Jordan Addison, who had 133 yards and 3 touchdowns. And for the Falcons, their leading passer was Kirk Cousins, who threw for 344 yards and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Bijan Robinson, who had 92 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Darnell Mooney, who had 142 receiving yards. So in this game, this is actually a pretty close game throughout the entire game. The Vikings basically just pulled it away right at the end there, and it's kind of interesting. So there's kind of the talks about the quarterback. Sam Darnold, who played absolutely amazing this game and has played really great all season and may be included in MVP talks, maybe not. And then Kirk Cousins. What do they do about those 2 quarterbacks? So for the Vikings, I honestly think you shouldn't re-sign Sam Darnold. He's going to be too expensive, and I do think you can either use J.J. McCarthy or maybe get a cheap quarterback on the market and play really good. Because this is what I've said since even before the season started. I thought Sam Darnold's going to have a really good year because you have the best wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. You have probably one of, if not the best number 2 receiver in Jordan Addison, and you have one of the best tight ends in T.J. Hockenson. So you have you have a good defense. And so overall, this is such a great team. As long as Sam Darnold didn't play unbelievably horrible, I thought he was going to have a good year, and that's what he's ended up having. And so overall, I just think it'd be a bad idea to kind of, I don't want to say believe your own hype, but say Sam Darnold is the reason you're winning, as opposed to Sam Darnold's playing great, but the whole team is good enough to win without a quarterback. And then the other quarterback you have to talk about is Kirk Cousins. Should he be benched or not? I do not think he should, because overall, even though he's threw a bad interception, I don't think he's playing as bad as his statistics suggest, in the sense that he is keeping them close in games, and he hasn't been playing great, but hasn't been playing unbelievably horrible. And then also Kirk Cousins, you have a lot of money invested in him. You're probably not going to make the wild card, but you're only 1 game behind the Buccaneers to win the division. So you have to say right now, with your remaining games, who gives you a better shot at winning? Michael Penix Jr. or Kirk Cousins? And I think it's Kirk Cousins, because he started slow, and then he had a really big hot streak, and then he kind of ended, and now he's kind of slowing off quite a bit. But I just don't think Michael Penix Jr. gives you a shot at winning the division. And again, you're only 1 game behind, you're still in this, and I just think you gotta stick with Kirk Cousins, and then next year, if you want to decide to cut him or move on, figure it out next year. But overall, I just think right now you gotta keep with them, because you're only 1 game behind the Buccaneers. The next game is the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. The Steelers won 27-14. The Steelers' leading passer was Russell Wilson, who threw for 158 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Najee Harris, who rushed for 53 yards and a touchdown, and their leading receiver is Pat Freiermuth, who had 48 receiving yards and a touchdown. And for the Browns, their leading passer is Jameis Winston, who threw for 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher is Nick Chubb, who rushed for 48 yards, and their leading receiver is Jerry Jeudy, who had 64 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, the Steelers played fine. The Browns played fine. I felt like more of a defensive matchup, in the sense that Russell Wilson, he didn't turn the ball over. That was good. He didn't have any spectacular great plays, but he didn't make any big mistakes, and that's good. And yes, he was missing his top receiver in George Pickens, so that was a problem, but just he had a nice, solid game. And then the Browns, I do think they are a decent team. They just have to have better quarterback play. Plain and simple. Jameis Winston, yes, he didn't throw any pick sixes this week, so maybe the Lord did deliver him from pick sixes, but he did throw 2 interceptions, with one of them being really, really egregious. And just that's who he is. It feels like 1 minute he'll throw an amazing, beautiful throw, and then the next minute he's throwing an absolute disaster. I think at this point, I would maybe bench Jameis Winston, in the sense that clearly he's not your future guy. He's not going to, be a part of your franchise next year. And so maybe Dorian Thompson-Robinson or somebody else can help you out. It's a bad situation. The Browns aren't going to make the playoffs, and just overall, not a good situation for them on quarterback. At least Jerry Jeudy's looking good. That's a good thing. And for the Steelers, you got to be happy you got the win. You're still leading the division. You'll probably win it. And then you got the win. That's the main thing. That's what you need. The next game is the Miami Dolphins versus the New York Jets. The Dolphins won 32-26. The Dolphins' leading passer was Tua, who had 331 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher is Devon Achane, who had 24 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver is Tyreek Hill, who had 115 yards and a touchdown. And then for the Jets, your leading passer was Aaron Rodgers, who had 339 yards and a touchdown. Your leading rusher was Braylon Allen, who had 43 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Garrett Wilson, who had 114 receiving yards. So this game just felt like the pinnacle of the Jets in the sense that the offense looked really great. Your special teams made all their field goals, and then your defense just let you down. And that's how the Jets have been all season, in the sense that they can't get all three phases to click, in the sense that when their offense and defense is playing pretty good, their kicker is missing a bunch of field goals and they're losing the game. When their offense and special teams are looking great, their defense is just non-existent and just can't score enough points. And then when their defense is doing good and special teams is going good, their offense is struggling a lot and can't put points up on the board. And so that just feels like the definition of what's been going on with the Jets all season. So where do you go from here? First of all, you got to bench Aaron Rodgers. There's no point for him to playing if you're out of the playoffs. You're just risking him getting injured, and if he gets injured, you're both stuck with him, and he might miss the beginning of next year. So what do you do with him? Honestly, I think you do need to draft a quarterback, and I do think that he could be a good mentor, because we've seen this a lot. I'm a big fan of sitting quarterbacks where Patrick Mahomes learned a lot from Alex Smith, Joe Montana learned a lot, or Steve Young learned a lot from Joe Montana, Brett Favre learned a lot from Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers learned a lot from Brett Favre, and Jordan Love learned a lot from Aaron Rodgers. So I do think if you do keep Aaron Rodgers, you can bring him back as a good mentor. And then also, I think you just have to have a conversation with your new general manager and your new head coach. Say to the general manager, hey, do you believe with a couple of different roster moves, this is a Super Bowl team? With Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers, or do you not believe it? You're a couple of moves away from winning the Super Bowl. And if not, then probably get rid of Aaron Rodgers, or or try to reload it for another year. And then same with the head coach. Say, do you believe with a couple of better play calls and better coaching, this team is a Super Bowl team? Again, if you do, then go all in again, and if you don't, start rebuilding. And for the Dolphins, they're playing really good. They're trying to make it back into the playoffs. I still think it's very unlikely for them to make the playoffs. There's still a shot. There's always a shot, but it's going to be tough. And then it does kind of also is unfortunate that Tyreek Hill did score a touchdown, because Tyreek Hill had this insane statistic where he had 5 children born this year, with his wife just giving birth to a child on Tuesday, I believe. So he's had 5 children born this year and only 4 receiving touchdowns. So now he's tied the amount of children he's had this year to the amount of receiving touchdowns he's had this year. So I don't know. I just thought that was a funny statistic. Sadly, he broke it, but so Dolphins again. You're trying to claw your way back from a horrible situation, and then the Jets. There's really no winning, and there's no good points to the Jets. So we'll see what they're going to decide next year. The next game is the New Orleans Saints versus the New York Giants. The Saints won 14-11. The Saints' leading passer is Derek Carr, who threw for 219 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Alvin Kamara, who rushed for 44 yards, and their leading receiver was Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who had 51 receiving yards. For the Giants, their leading passer is Drew Lock, who threw for 227 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher is Drew Lock, who had 59 rushing yards, and their leading receiver is Malik Nabers, who had 79 receiving yards. So this was a defensive battle through and through. Neither offense looked really that good. The Saints kind of struggled a bit in the red zone, and then the big news is Derek Carr did get injured. So it looks like he will probably be out for the season. He might be able to return for the final game, but I don't think it really matters because they're probably not going to make the playoffs with Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler, depending on who they start. And then the Giants, your defense looked decent. Malik Neighbors looked decent. Drew Lock struggled a lot. Drew Lock really didn't look good at all. And you just got to be happy with the loss because you're going to get a better draft position. And who knows, you might get your quarterback of the future. The next game is the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Carolina Panthers. The Eagles won 22-16. The Eagles' leading passer is Jalen Hurts, who had 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher is Saquon Barkley, who had 124 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is A.J. Brown, who had 43 receiving yards. And for the Panthers, their leading passer is Bryce Young, who had 191 yards, a touchdown and interception. Their leading rusher is Chuba Hubbard, who had 92 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Adam Thielen, who had 102 receiving yards. So for this game, it was kind of interesting. Both teams kind of had a slow start from the majority of the game. Jalen Hurts really didn't look good, and I think he's just been kind of an average quarterback most of the season. And Saquon Barkley really feels like he's putting the team on his back and playing well. I don't know if you remember, it was a couple of years ago where the Saints had Ryan Tannehill, and it just felt like Derrick Henry put the entire team on his back and was winning them all these games. That's what it feels like with Saquon Barkley, is that he has the team on his back and playing just really, really well. And then Bryce Young, you gotta give him credit. He is playing pretty well. He's not playing amazing, but he is definitely playing better and has proven himself worthy at least to potentially be the Panthers starter of the future. The whole team is terrible with the Panthers, and Bryce Young has been playing decent recently. And honestly, they should have won this game. If Xavier Legette didn't drop that pass from Bryce Young, they would have won this game. Bryce Young orchestrated a beautiful comeback drive right there at the end, and they should have won. And that's kind of plain and simple. The Eagles, you gotta be happy because you survived this, but if you're struggling to beat the Panthers, it's gonna probably be a little bit worrying come playoff time. And then the Panthers, again, Bryce Young is looking really good. Your team is kind of a shell of itself, and it's not very good. And so overall, I think both teams got to be really happy here. And sooner or later, Bryce Young is going to get his key win and is going to look really, really great. The next game is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Las Vegas Raiders. The Buccaneers won 28-13. The Buccaneers' leading passer was Baker Mayfield, who had 295 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Rachaad White, who had 90 yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Cade Otton, who had 70 receiving yards. And for the Raiders, their leading passer was Aiden O'Connell, who had 104 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher was Sincere McCormick, I'm probably butchering that, with 78 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Michael Mayer, who had 68 receiving yards. So in this game, the Buccaneers kind of beat on a terrible team. But Baker Mayfield had a couple of really bad passes that were intercepted that kept the Raiders in it. But the Raiders aren't good. The Buccaneers are good. Kind of plain and simple. It sucks that it looks like Mike Evans' streak of 1,000-yard seasons is going to come to an end this year. Rachaad White really stepped in when Bucky Irving went down, and so that's good for him. And then for the Raiders, McCormick came in, and it looked like he's the first time the Raiders actually had a rushing attack. So he played pretty well against that horrible Raiders offensive line. And then Aiden O'Connell unfortunately went down. Aiden O'Connell wasn't playing that bad when he went down, but, he got injured and is going to be done for the year. And then Brock Bowers, he had an amazing one-handed catch, looks like an absolute stud, and definitely deserves to be in Offensive Rookie of the Year conversations. And that's all I'll say about this game. A good team beat a terrible team. The Buccaneers right now have the division. They're ahead in the division, trying to win that. And then the Raiders are out of the playoffs. I think they will probably fire Antonio Pierce, their coach, at the end of this year and kind of just completely start from scratch and rebuild because the Raiders are a mess. The next game is the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Tennessee Titans. The Jaguars won 10-6. The Jaguars' leading passer was Mac Jones, who had 220 yards and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher is Tank Bigsby, who had 55 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver is Brian Thomas Jr., who had 86 receiving yards. And for the Titans, their leading passer was Will Levis, who had 168 yards. Their leading rusher is Tony Pollard, who had 102 yards. And their leading receiver is Calvin Ridley, who had 59 receiving yards. So in this game, I didn't think Will Levis looked bad. He did get injured, but after he got injured, he kind of struggled a bit. And then Tony Pollard, I think he looked really good, and just it kind of was just a terrible game between two terrible teams. I thought Will Levis was going to look really good against this bad Jaguars defense because he has been trending upward. And then he kind of just got injured, and yes, I think the injury to his shoulder played a huge part of it. But just overall, Mac Jones really didn't play well. Will Levis didn't play well. Tony Pollard played pretty well. And then Brian Thomas Jr., he looks really great. And looks like he can be their wide receiver one of the future. But just, again, overall, just two bad teams playing bad. And it'll be interesting what they do in the draft and how to try to fix their franchise. The next game is the Seattle Seahawks versus the Arizona Cardinals. The Seahawks won 30-18. The Seahawks leading passer is Geno Smith, who threw for 233 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Zach Charbonnet, who had 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. And their leading receiver is Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had 82 receiving yards and a touchdown. And for the Cardinals, their leading passer was Kyler Murray, who threw for 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was James Conner, who rushed for 90 yards. And their leading receiver is Trey McBride, who had 70 receiving yards. So in this game, it really feels like the Seahawks are back. They did struggle for a little bit this season, and then now they're just really on top of things. Geno Smith looks really, really good and has been playing much better. Zach Charbonnet really played an amazing game and kind of put the team on his back this week. And just overall, the Seahawks are trending in the right direction. Right now, they're winning their division. It is going to be close to coming to the end, but they are winning. And then, man, the Cardinals. They've just been such a disappointment because it kind of keeps going back and forth in the sense that, like, they're playing like one of the best teams in the league or one of the worst. And just this week, Kyler Murray just played horrible. He's plain and simple. He just didn't play well. He threw 2 really bad interceptions. And I was thinking everyone was like, oh, the Call of Duty curse is broken. And maybe it was at the time, but now it's come back to bite him. Maybe that's it. Or he just needs to start playing better for this team and putting the team on the back if they want any chance of making the playoffs. And at this moment, I'd say the Cardinals probably aren't going to make it. But the Seahawks, you got to be really happy. You're getting close to winning the division. I don't think it will really matter at the end just because I don't think the Seahawks are on the same caliber as like the Eagles, the Lions, the Packers, the Vikings. I think they're likely to be one and done, but hey, at least they're trending in the right direction, and that's what you want most. The next game is the the LA Rams versus the Buffalo Bills. The Rams won 44-42. The Rams' leading passer was Matthew Stafford, who threw for 320 yards, 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Kyren Williams, who had 87 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Puka Nacua, who had 162 yards and a touchdown. And for the Bills, their leading passer is Josh Allen, who threw for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Josh Allen, who had 82 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Khalil Shakir, who had 106 receiving yards and a touchdown. So for this game, it's kind of interesting where everyone's talking about how Josh Allen actually increased his MVP chances in a loss. He played really well. Honestly, both teams just played really well. The Rams' offense was humming, and the Bills' offense was also playing amazing. There is some cause for concern because of the Bills' defense. This is really the first time their defense got exposed and just got absolutely shattered. And I kind of feel bad for Joe Burrow because everyone's like, oh, look, Josh Allen played really well even though they lost. And it's like, that's Joe Burrow's entire season. Honestly, I think Joe Burrow should be an MVP candidate right now, but just overall, he just keeps on losing because of his horrible defense. And so this would make me really nervous if you're the Bills. Again, the Rams, they're still in contention. They're still trying to win the division, make the playoffs. And the Bills are going to make the playoffs, but man, their defense just played absolutely horrible, and their offense so far this year has been able to kind of make up for a bad defense, but if their defense can't get their stuff together, they're going to struggle come playoff time. But overall, you got to be kind of happy if you're happy for the Bills offense, but terrible for the Bills defense. And then the Rams, you just got to be happy. You've been struggling a lot this season. Now you're finally getting healthy, and you're looking really good, and it feels like you can score on anybody and you can beat anybody you want to. The next game is the San Francisco 49ers versus the Chicago Bears. The 49ers won 38-13. The 49ers' leading passer was Brock Purdy, who threw for 325 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Isaac Guerendo, who had 78 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading receiver is George Kittle, who had 151 receiving yards. And then for the Bears, their leading passer is Caleb Williams, who had 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher is DeAndre Swift, who had 38 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is DJ Moore, who had 49 receiving yards. So in this game, it just felt like the collapse of the Bears and the return of the 49ers. The Bears have been progressively getting better and better, almost beating the Lions, almost beating the Packers, almost beating the Vikings. They've just been playing really well recently, and then this is just like a snapback to their old form where they've just been playing horrible. Caleb Williams played horrible, and maybe Thomas Brown's just one of those guys where he's like a good offensive coordinator, but just not a head coach guy, because there are some people like that. There are good coordinators, but just really can't be a head coach. But just the Bears looked horrible. Their offense looked horrible. Their defense looked horrible. And then for the 49ers, they look like they're back. They're finally getting healthier, and Brock Purdy looked good. George Kittle looked good. Isaac Guerendo looked great. So it feels like they're finally kind of turning a corner. Who knows if it's going to be too late to be able to beat the Seahawks and kind of get back and winning the division, because right now they're probably not making the wild card. They're probably only shots winning the division. But, like I said, you got to be really happy for the 49ers. And then the Bears, just what happened? You're kind of collapsing, and you can't do that. So they'll hire a new coach come the offseason, and we'll see what happens then. The next game is the Kansas City Chiefs versus the LA Chargers. The Chiefs won 19-17. The Chiefs' leading passer was Patrick Mahomes, who threw for 210 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Isaiah Pacheco, who had 55 rushing yards, and their leading receiver was Travis Kelce, who had 45 receiving yards. And for the Chargers, their leading passer was Justin Herbert, who threw for 213 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Gus Edwards, who had 36 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Josh Palmer, who had 78 receiving yards. So how do the Chiefs keep doing it? That's kind of the question. Game-winning field goal, doinks off, probably should be a miss, but then somehow doinks right back in, and they win. And it kind of makes me nervous in the sense that, for the Chiefs, in the sense that they are a bad football team. They keep barely winning super close games, and come playoffs, when you're against these high elite teams, it's going to be a struggle probably, and I don't think they have a lot of good solutions. And then the Chargers, I just don't think their offense is that great. Ladd McConkey was basically their only receiver, and he missed today's game because he was injured. At least Quentin Johnson learned how to catch a couple of balls. That was good. He had one really great catch. And Justin Herbert, he played fine. They had basically no running game, and just overall, it feels like with injuries, the Chargers are a big mess right now. And then the Chiefs, this keeps on happening where they should lose and then somehow win. And it just kind of makes no sense. So I guess if you're the Chiefs, you gotta be happy with a win. The Chargers, you're a bit of a mess, but at least it was close. But yeah, overall, this game was just not very good on either side. The final game of the week was the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Dallas Cowboys. The Bengals won 27-20. The Bengals' leading passer was Joe Burrow, who had 369 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher was Chase Brown, who had 58 rushing yards, and their leading receiver was Jamar Chase, who had 177 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And for the Cowboys, their leading passer was Cooper Rush, who had 183 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher was Rico Dowdle, who had 131 yards, and their leading receiver was CeeDee Lamb, who had 93 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, it was kind of a decent game. Both teams are going back and forth. Neither defense really played that well. There was kind of one key moment in the game where the Cowboys finally stopped the Bengals, and the Bengals are going to punt, and the Cowboys are probably going to win the game. And then, all of a sudden, the punt gets blocked, and then the Cowboys muff it and, hit it, and then the Bengals recover, and then the Bengals go down, get a touchdown, and win. It was very ugly. So overall, does this game mean anything? Probably not. Like, the Bengals are still looking good. I think Joe Burrow still needs to be in MVP conversation, even though they don't have a good record. Bengals are probably going to miss the playoffs. Cowboys are probably going to miss the playoffs. And so, just overall, Bengals defense still looks bad. Bengals offense still looks good. And Cooper Rush has been playing decent and has definitely earned a backup job. So that is what happened in Week 14 of the NFL season. If you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. I'll see you on the next one.